Hello, today we're going to be doing 12.7 graphing sine and cosine functions. The vocab amplitude is crucial, where the amplitude is located in front of the word cosine or sine. The amplitude, to find it, it's the absolute value of whatever number is there. If you don't see a number, it's understood to be 1. And the amplitude, basically, it's from the midline, and I will show you what that is when we actually draw it. It's from the midline to the top of our curve. Okay, and like I said, I'll show you where that's at when we do the actual graph. The frequency is the number of cycles, and remember, cycles the period, so that's one complete period from beginning to the end, and we find that by doing the 360 degrees divided by the absolute value of b. And if you recall, b is located right here after the word sine or after the word cosine and before the angle theta. Or you can use, which is what pre-calc uses, is the 2 pi over the absolute value of b. And that will help you find the stopping point of to make a complete cycle or complete period. Okay, so we're going to take a look at amplitude and period. To find the amplitude and period, let's recall the format. So the format was y equals, your amplitude is located before the word cosine or sine, and then b would come next, followed by the theta symbol or the angle that we're looking at to graph. So in looking at this sample here, our a value is an understood 1 here, and then so our amplitude is the absolute value, in this case, of 1. So our amplitude is 1. So that's how high it goes. That's our height. And then for our for the period, we take 360 degrees divided by the b value, absolute value of the b. So to find our period, the length from when it stops to it starts a complete cycle, in our case, there is the absolute value of a half because it's located in the b spot. Well, 360 degrees divided by 1/2 is the same as 360 times 2, so that's 720 degrees. I also like to show it in terms of radians. So 2 pi, which is 360 degrees, divided by the half, absolute value of half, well, when you divide it by half, it's timesing it by 2, so that's 4 pi's, which makes sense. For 720 degrees is 4 pi's. So that's our period. So let's go back and find our amplitude and our period. Doesn't matter which one, same thing. Okay. Let's take a look at B. So on B, I'm trying to take some of this stuff off here. We have the period. No, let's find the amplitude first. The amplitude is 3. So that's my amplitude. Well, the absolute value of 3 is 3. So there's my amplitude. And then the period, we take our 360 degrees divided by the absolute value of b. Well, b is 5. So when I take 360 divided by 5, I get 72 degrees, will help me make a complete cycle for my curve. Or 2 pi divided by the absolute value of 5, which is just 2 pi over 5, or 2/5 pi. So that's all they needed. So once again, let's identify our amp. Here's our amp. And then here is either one will work for the period. Okay, so that's how you find the amplitude and the period. For our next one, let's take a look at the parent graphs. So for the parent graph, think of a cup, the shape of a cup, and I went ahead and wrote it here. When you think of the shape of a cup, it's going to be there, the bottom, the midline, and then at the top. Those are the main points for a cosine graph. So let's take a look at the parent graph. So our parent graph is going to be y equals cosine theta. So to graph y equals cosine theta, our amp is 1. Our period is 360 degrees, because remember it's 360 divided by the absolute value of b, which is 2 pi. Okay, so let's put 1 here, about the same. So here's our midline. This is what I was talking about earlier. This is the midline. This is where all my zeros are located. So the amplitude is from here to the midline. That's my amplitude. Or it could also be from here to this midline. That's the amplitude. That's why it's the absolute value, because it's either one of them. What I do at the midline, at the amp, is I draw a horizontal line as my fence, like before asymptotes. Think of them as asymptotes. And it's not going to cross my curve that looks like a cup, is not going to curve outside that boundary line. And then I've already established the fact that it is 360 degrees. Now I will give you a hint. It's always it's always 4 units out, our graph, always, no matter what. So you can always draw those 4 tick marks. And then that's going to be our period. And if you think of the quadrant, which is 90 degrees, 180 degrees are quadrantals, 270 degrees, 360 degrees. So ours is 360 degrees or 2 pi. So let's take a look at the 2 pi. 90 degrees, if you recall, could be pi over 2 in radians. Pi, 180. 270 is 3 pi over 2. And then 360 degrees is 2 pi. So as you can see, I'm trying to connect the unit circle with our cosine and graph. So what happens is, to graph it, you start at the amplitude, at the max. That's your maximum point, your highest, on a cosine. And then you go to the midline. And then you go at the midpoint mark, which is the second tick mark. You reached your minimum point. And then the curve goes back up to the midline, and then it goes at the end of the period, it goes back up to your max. And then let's draw a curvature. Now remember, this keeps going. It keeps going, so it's like a wave. Keeps going, okay? But we just want to show one period in my class, just show one period. So that's the cosine. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next parent graph. So remember, this is the parent graph. This is the parent graph. Okay. To do sine, think of a snake. So for the snake, you will go ahead and start low, or in the midline, and then you would go up to max, and then down to the midline, and then the lowest point, and then back at the midline. So that would be our sine graph. So let's take a look at this parent graph. Once again, this is the parent graph. And y equals sine of theta. So our amp is 1, because it's the absolute value of 1. Our period is 360 degrees divided by 1, so 360 degrees, or 2 pi. So that's our parent graph all the time. So let's go ahead and draw our amp. We have our midline, and I like to draw my fencing, my asymptotes. And remember, we always go 4 units out for a complete cycle, and in this case, since it is the parent graph, it goes to 360 degrees, or 2 pi. 180 is the midpoint, mid-mark. This is going, it looks like it's going up by 90s. Oh, did not want to put that one there. So 270 degrees, which is 3 pi over 2. All right, so let's go ahead and graph it. So to graph it, we start at the origin, and then we go, so we start at the midline, and then we reach our maximum point at the first quarter there. And then halfway, we go back to the midline. And then 3/4 of the way, we go to a min. And then at the end of our cycle period, we go to the midline. So our graph is a smooth curvature. So there you go. And once again, remember these are curves. So these would just curve, keep curving. Okay? So that's the parent graph. Let's take a look at our graphs when they're not parent graphs. So for this particular one, we want to take a look at the amp and the period. So our amp is 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then we always go 4 out, 1, 2, 3, 4. And our end is at 360 divided by the absolute value of b, or 2 pi divided by b. I'm just going to go ahead and do it in terms of radians. So ours is going to be 2 pi. So for me, it's so much easier. So 2 pi there, halfway. I always do halfway. And then let's see here. So we have, this is a cosine, so think of a cup. We start at our max. We go to our line, halfway mark, we reach our minimum, then we go to the midline, and then we go back up to end our curve. So there is our curve for a cup, which is cosine. So this one, the only difference is that it was stretched much more longer because our amp was longer. The next one is our amp is at a half. And our B value now is going to be 2 pi, if I can write 2 pi, divided by the absolute value of 2, which is pi, or 180 degrees. You can do these in terms of degrees as well. All right, so this one, here's a 1, so there's a half. So there's my midline. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 out, and that's going to be at pi. So the midpoint is there at pi over 2. So it looks like we're going by 45 degrees. So to graph it, we start, let's see, this is sine, so we start at the origin. We work our way up to the max, halfway up, go back down at the midline. Then 3/4 of the way, we go to our minimum. And then at the end, we go back up to our max. So that would be our curve for half sine 2 theta. For sound waves, to connect it to our graph of cosine and sine, we have the humans hear sounds with frequencies as low as 20 hertz. So for 3A, it's asking us to convert the 20 hertz to 1 hertz, which would give us a period, 1 cycle. So 20 hertz converted to 1 hertz would mean that our period would have to be 1/20th of that amount, or 0.05 seconds. And that's how long it would take to make it 1 hertz. Our cycle would be from beginning to end will be 5 seconds to hear this sound. For 3B, it's asking us to write an equation. Well, that's fine. The only thing is they give us the amplitude is 1. We're going to use cosine. But if it doesn't say, you can just use cosine, or you can use sine. It doesn't matter. It'll end up with the same information. And then for our period, we take the 1/20th and we convert it to find our B value. So we know that the B value is missing. Well, we have an equation that allows us to find our period is equal to 2 pi over B. So then when we cross multiply and solve for B, we end up that B is 40 pi's. So our equation then would be y equals 1 cosine 40 pi's is our B value. And then times normally theta, but they want us to use time for our theta instead of that theta symbol. They want us to use time. So let's go ahead and graph this. So it goes off 1, 2, 3, 4 units, and in 5 seconds, which is that 1/20th, our cycle will stop. And this is amplitude of 1. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my asymptotes per se. I think of a cup. So I start out at my max at a quarter of the way. I'm at my midline. Then halfway, I'm at my minimum. Then I go back to my midline and I go back up to my max, and that would complete my cosine model for my sound wave. If you have any questions, please ask. If you need to rewind to clarify something, please do so, guys. Have a great day.